moved from Idaho to Alaska about 2 months ago, and already I have experienced something I never thought I would ever experience. After taking a week to recover from a 5-day trek across Canada on the Alaska Highway, I had decided I was going to get out and explore the wilderness of my new home state and try to catch a glimpse of the wildlife such as moose and bears. The house I am renting is on the outskirts of the nearest town, so I basically live in the middle of the forest and have access to miles of dense woods. I still don't know what I had been thinking when I decided to go into the woods without anything but my phone, which at the time didn't get service in Alaska, and some earbuds. I began running at a medium pace into the woods, hopping over bushes and branches while jamming out to some shaky graves. I had probably gone through about 5 songs when my shoelace got hooked on a fallen tree, and I was thrown to the ground face first. I immediately got back up, swore out of irritation, and began to put my earbuds back in when I realized I had no idea where I was. At some point, I had lost my sense of direction and had only but a faint idea as to which direction I had came from. I started to run the way I thought I had come from when I began to panic and second-guess myself when I realized I should have come out into my backyard ages ago. I didn't want to panic because I knew that it would make everything worse if I did, and I started to try and pinpoint the right direction. Of course, I eventually realized that I was hopelessly and utterly lost without the slightest indication of which way would bring me to some sort of civilization. After a few brief moments of cursing and groaning, I decided to follow my gut and go the direction which I thought would possibly lead me home. I started running at full speed, hoping to break the tree line in a matter of minutes when something on the ground had caught my eye. It was a backpack. I stopped instantly and looked around for a person or campsite, but there was nothing I could see from the spot I was at, which was situated at the bottom of a small hill. The bag looked as if it may have been abandoned for a few days at least, but was slightly damp from the rain earlier that morning. I kneeled down and picked the bag up, resting it against my knees. It had a heavy weight to it when I moved it, so I knew that there was something inside. Looking back now, I remember the dark feeling I had that I got in my chest right before I had unzipped the main part of the backpack. Inside, there were bags of what I immediately knew was an assortment of illegal drugs and items used to administer them. I quickly stood up and took a step back. I had such a powerful feeling of dread that I felt like I was in imminent danger. I just wanted to get out of there and find my way home, so I started to run again, up to the top of the hill. I was hit with a wave of excitement when I saw a house at the bottom that was buried in the trees. I'd begun to make a start for it when something in my head told me to stop. The thought entered my mind that what I had just discovered was awfully close to this house. I wanted so badly to be out of the woods and find some form of civilization, but something told me that it wasn't safe. I ran away from the house along the tree line, hoping that I would possibly stumble upon another house. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I stumbled into a neighborhood of sorts and asked a man working in his yard for directions. He was kind enough to drive me home and assure me that everyone gets lost in Alaska at some point. As soon as I got home, I showered and chugged some water and then immediately called the police to report what I had seen. However, due to the fact that I had no idea where I was, I couldn't tell them where to find the drugs or where the house was, so my report was basically useless. I just would have felt guilty if I hadn't have at least said something. I've driven all over the area down different roads trying to find the house, but I never have. It's probably for the best though, because I don't want to get caught up in something I shouldn't be. I'm glad I had listened to my gut and kept running from that house, because people in possession of such a large amount of illicit substances, I can only assume, would be extremely dangerous. The summer after I graduated high school, my mom helped me get a part-time job at a little diner about 4 miles from our house. The pay was a whole lot, and I was putting away almost everything I could in the hopes of buying a second-hand car before the end of the summer. I didn't spend a single cent unless it was necessary, but since my shifts tended to end pretty late, it put me in an awkward position. Spend a chunk of wages on cab fare, which was going to be way higher at that time of night, or I could jog home. Now, I wasn't very athletic at this point, but the need to save money made it a real convenient time to start. So I pulled out some old sports gear, brought them to work with me, then started running home 2 or 3 times a week. It really sucked at first, and a few times in the early days I threw in the towel and took a cab home. But after a while, as it got easier, I started getting a buzz of how much more stamina I was getting. It got to the point where I'd time my runs on my Casio stopwatch, and sometimes I'd make a game of trying to run the fastest time I could. Part of my route involved cutting through the middle of this big piece of parkland, and right down the middle too. And the first few times, running through there at night was just really creepy. It got less scary as time went by, as the place was mostly deserted by that time, and it wasn't in any gang territory or anything, but even so, I'd take out one of my headphones before running through just to be safe. Then one night, right as I was getting pretty comfortable running through the park, I heard something that turned my blood to ice. I'm about a third of the way through, and I hear this ear-splitting, blood-curdling scream coming from somewhere in the darkness. Because I had taken out only my right headphone and the sound was coming from my left side, at first I couldn't tell where it was coming from, and that made it all the more frightening. I stopped in my tracks, pulled the other headphone out, then just stood there under the streetlight, extremely freaked out. I remember kind of pulling myself together and telling myself that it was probably just a fox or something, because they make incredibly creepy wails at night sometimes, I'm sure you know. But then right as I start to think about starting up jogging again, I hear the same scream, only this time I can pinpoint where it's coming from. If I'm honest, my gut feeling was telling me to just keep running, because whatever the reason that scream was, it had to be really bad. But at the same time, I knew it was pretty much down to me to do something about it. It really did feel like fate had singled me out to be like, are you a piece of crap, or are you not a piece of crap? And as scared as I was, I chose not to be a piece of crap. I walked off the lit path into the dark, straining my eyes to see where I was going at first. Being under the streetlights had totally ruined any natural night vision that I'd had, so when the next big scream came, it was so close that I swear that I almost peed my pants. But by that point, I could actually hear that the scream was coming from someone really young, and before long, I spotted a kid just sitting under a tree, completely in the dark, just like breathlessly crying before wailing every so often. If I had to guess, I'd say that they were maybe 9 or 10 years old, definitely still around elementary school age for sure. I was actually worried about scaring the kid, but he barely reacted at all when I finally asked him where his mom and dad were. He just looked at me, still in tears, and made some gestures that I couldn't figure out. All I could do was just try my best to calm him down and hope that he wasn't seriously hurt in some way. If he was, he sure as heck wasn't telling me about it, and again, I didn't want to have blood on my hands because I didn't get the kid help in time or something. I kept trying to check him for blood, and was relieved when I couldn't see anything, but that didn't mean that he didn't have like a burst appendix or something. You see where I'm going with this, internal injuries and whatnot. When I finally get the kid to the point where he can talk to me, I try to break the parent's question down into 2 parts, seeing if the words mom or dad elicit a better response than just parents. I ask him super slowly, "Where is your dad?" The kid just shrugs and says, "I don't know where my dad is." Then I ask him where his mom is real slow, and get this. He says, before totally breaking down into tears again, "I don't have a mom anymore." No, in the moment there was a part of me that thought maybe it was all just some childhood antics. The kid and the mom had a fight, the kid declared that he was running away, like a lot of kids do at some point, and then he gotten lost and scared in a dark, creepy park. I started telling him, "Sure you do, buddy. We just need to get you back home so we can sort this whole thing out." He starts shaking his head like, no, then breaks into tears again. So I have to work at calming him down all over again. Finally, I get him to a state where I can ask him if he knows where he lives at, and the kid says yeah, he does. I then ask him to show me, and after a little convincing, he gets up, takes my hand, and then starts leading me off towards where he lives. The first sign that I realized something was really wrong was when the kid basically led me across the street to his house. He wasn't lost, and when we got closer to what he claimed was his front door, I saw it was wide open. Right away I'm thinking, uh-oh, because this isn't exactly like taking the kid to the front desk at a supermarket. I have no idea what had happened in that house, and to know that the door being open at like 2 a.m. was definitely not a good sign. First thing I do is walk the kid away from the house into a neighbor's place. I was worried that this might freak the kid out more, but he didn't freak out. He just kept on sniffling, probably just in shock at that stage. And this is right after my parents bought me a cell phone too, mainly for emergencies, so as I'm hammering away at the neighbor's door, I'm also calling 911 to let them know that I thought something really bad had just happened to this poor kid. The neighbor had opened the door, armed by the way, and he had heard the whole exchange with the dispatcher. They got the kid into their house, then totally against what the dispatcher had told me, which was to stay away from the kid's house if there was a suspected violence situation going on, the neighbor comes back out, strapped up, and runs over to the kid's house. I'm telling the guy to stop, knowing that if the cops just show up while he's still inside, he could end up getting shot. He just told me to tell them that he was inside if they showed up. Like the cops don't just shoot first and ask questions later if someone has a weapon, and then just went ahead and crept inside, gun drawn, like he was friggin' John Wick or something. I don't know if I was expecting to hear shots or screams or whatever, but like a minute later, the guy came out again, eyes all wide, saying, "We got 2 bodies in there," and making comments about how bad it was inside. And that's when I realized that when the kid said, "I don't have a mommy anymore," he really meant it. I think he'd actually witnessed whatever had just happened, but was just too messed up to actually say it. After a while, the cops showed up. I told them what I knew. Then my part was all played out. They were more interested in talking to the neighbor who had gone into the house, just so they could get an idea of the layout. All they did with me was take my name, address, and phone number, just in case they needed to talk to me, as I guess they had what they needed right in front of them. I finished my journey back home, half running, half walking, in a state of shock. That when I got home, I was completely exhausted, but I couldn't manage to drift off until almost dawn. The adrenaline was bad enough, but when I was wondering what was going to happen to that kid, that got my mind racing over and over. I remember hearing about it on the news later, but it wasn't like I was calling around to all my friends to be like, "Yo, that was me they were talking about." People found out one way or another, but for a while back then, I just didn't want to think about it. It's been years now, and the kid must be nearing the age I was when I found him that night. I hope that he's moved past what happened and managed to make a life for himself somehow. But if that kid really did witness his mama getting shot by her boyfriend, all before he turned the gun on himself, then I don't know if there's a kid alive who would come back from seeing something like that. This story happened to me when I was 18 years old in my senior year of high school. It was spring break of 2009 and my family was taking a trip to my uncle's house in Florida. He lived in a small but really beautiful home in West Palm Beach, Florida. Any of you who are familiar to this area know that it's really nice and a lot of people go there when they are reaching retirement age. My uncle was around that age and really enjoyed the community that he was living in. For as long as I can remember, we would make this trip for spring break. It was cheap and affordable for my parents because we obviously didn't need to get a hotel, and we cooked at his house every night. So the most expensive part of the trip was just getting down there, which wasn't too bad. Next door to my uncle lived a guy named Robert, who was basically part of the family. He was an older guy who always made terrible jokes, but knew they were terrible, so usually got a pretty good laugh anyway. My family and I enjoyed his company, especially when we would play cards. He was a great partner to have in most card games. Unfortunately, in 2009, when we went down to my uncle's house for our yearly trip, Robert was gone, and my uncle had a new next-door neighbor named Leo. When we arrived at my uncle's house, Leo was standing in his garage, pretty much just staring at our car. We waved, and he waved back. Only when he waved, he had no emotion in his face. He was pretty tall, definitely over 6 foot and slightly overweight. He had the build of a bodybuilder who had just gotten older and was not able to keep up with the lifting. He had dark black hair that was parted with a bit of white hair sprinkled throughout. The first few nights went great, and we had fun just visiting and enjoying the beautiful Floridian weather. I think the third day, my brother and I were throwing the football around the yard, and we noticed Leo just staring at us again through his front window. I mean, it was harmless, just kind of weird and creepy. He was blatantly just standing there holding the curtain back and watching us. Later that night, my brother and I just sat outside on the porch, just hanging out talking about the NBA and enjoying the beautiful Florida night. All night long, we heard strange noises coming from inside Leo's house. It sounded like metal grinding, lots of coughing, and even some faint yelps. And I kid you not when I say all night, 1, 2, even 3 a.m., all this commotion persisted. We thought it was weird, but we really didn't think anything of it. In the morning, we were eating breakfast, and there was Leo, just sitting in the open garage looking back and forth between his garage and my uncle's house. How was he up so early? This guy literally must not sleep. He was up all night doing God knows what, making all sorts of noise. We asked our uncle if he knew anything about Leo next door, and he said he didn't really. Other than good morning or a polite how are you today, they really didn't say much to each other. My uncle did say that he was quiet, but always polite to him and stays out of everyone's business. He didn't attend any community meetings or activities or anything like that. We asked about the loud noises at night, and my uncle said he didn't really know too much about that and have never really noticed anything before. Later that afternoon, my brother and I were throwing the football around again. Leo left his house to his teal minivan. We waved, but this time he didn't wave back. My brother and I both looked at each other and decided to go look in his windows. Now we knew that this was wrong, and I would have never ever recommended doing this, but our curiosity got the better of us. When we looked through some of the exposed windows, we could only see a little, but it was weird. There was really no furniture. There was a wood saw in the middle of one of the rooms and sheets hanging everywhere. There was also several shovels by the back door and some plywood on some of the floors in another room. Now, when Robert had lived there in the past, we had been in that house many times, and it looked nothing like this. The house was completely changed, and not in a good way. As we started our way back to the road, we were stopped on the side of the house by Leo. He stood blocking our way. He said in a very stoic and low voice, "What are you doing on my property?" Thinking quick on our feet, I just said to him very casually, "Oh, sorry, our ball took a really awkward bounce and we couldn't find it. We got it now, though. We're all good." We started to walk by him, as he barely gave us enough room to cross. As we got to the road, he shouted in a bit more of a frantic voice this time, "If I catch you on my property again, you'll be sorry." My brother has a bit of a temper, so I thought he was going to confront the creepy old man. But to my surprise, he was just as freaked out as I was. What did this guy mean? "We'll be sorry," I thought. The next few nights, we heard the same noises during different parts throughout the night. The last night of our trip, we decided that we were going to get to the bottom of this one way or another. At about 2 a.m., we snuck outside and crept up to the window we looked at the other day, and now it was completely shut up, just like all of the other windows. Couldn't see anything inside. Just as we were going to give up and go back, my brother had noticed that there was some light shining from the back. His back door window was exposed. We snuck to the window and looked inside. And what we saw inside still creeps me out to this day. We saw a bit of Leo from the doorway. He appeared to be using the wood saw that we had seen, and on the ground, we saw something that looked like another human, but it was stiff and stuck in a position like a mannequin. The mannequin, or whatever it was, looked like it had blonde hair that had been glued on. Has our imagination finally gotten the best of us? What were we witnessing? The tinkerings of a madman? Or someone preparing for something much more sinister? We left the next day and saw Leo again standing in his driveway waving goodbye to us. My brother and I felt sick about the night before. Unfortunately, we never did go back to that house. My uncle bought a new, larger home about 35 miles away from his previous community. I often think back to that trip and really wonder what was going on in there. Was Leo really up to something evil, or were we just two young adults letting our minds get the better of us? Maybe he was just a creeper with some type of weird fetish. Either way, I'm glad we never had to see him again. This happened almost exactly a month ago. For context, I live in one of the surrounding cities around Toronto, which is about an hour drive depending on traffic. I ordered some weed from a dispensary, but I didn't realize it was in the heart of Toronto, so I had to make a last-minute trip at night to pick up the order. I don't own a car because I don't have a license, so I took an Uber. I arrive at my destination at around 10:20 p.m. and the store closes at like 10:45, so I'm late. I go to pay for the order, but my card declines. I'm extremely confused as I literally just paid for an Uber, check my bank balance, and I have more than enough for the purchase. But no, I can't purchase the product. I'm super annoyed and worried because I have no idea why my card is declining, and why now? My phone's almost dead. It's the middle of the night. I'm a 5-hour walk away from home. What on earth am I gonna do? I try booking an Uber and my card declines again. And I'm in some deep doo-doo. My mind is racing as I go through every possible solution to get home, and I don't have very long. My phone is at 10% and it's gonna die from the cold any minute now. So I tell my friend to call me an Uber after I e-transfer him $50. I didn't expect it to work, but miraculously it does, and he calls it. The second I receive the text from my friend saying it was confirmed, my phone dies. Well, I guess I just gotta hope that the Uber knows where I am, because if not, I don't know, I guess I sleep on the streets. Lord knows. So here I am, standing on the streets in the middle of Toronto like an idiot when this man asks me for some spare change. I tell him I've got nothing, and he pulls out a small knife from his jean pocket and tells me, "No, give me your money." Without missing a beat, I pull out my wallet and give it to him, as well as a vape I had in my pocket too. I had 2 toonies in there as well as my bank card and ID. He sees the bank card and takes it out, examines it for a wee bit before putting it back in my wallet and running off down the street. So now I'm just standing there in complete shock, wondering how I've managed to get myself into this situation. If the Uber never comes, I've got no way of going home or identifying who I am to anyone. I am well and truly screwed if that Uber doesn't show up. Thankfully, after not too long, the Uber arrives and I got home safely. To this day, this is the luckiest I've ever felt as an adult. I have absolutely no idea how I got out of that situation. I could have been stranded in Toronto. I could have been stabbed while getting mugged. I could have had to sleep on the streets. I have no idea what I would have done to get home had my friend not clutched it for me in the last second. It was like a 98th minute equalizer, except it was me versus my stupidity, and I just about pulled through.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.